So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Leaders Network information session. My name is Sarah, and I am the Research and Projects Coordinator within the STEM Careers team at the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, better known as ATSE, and thank you all for joining us online today. A quick housekeeping reminder that this session is being recorded, so please keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking, just to make sure that the video quality is good for those who want to watch back later. To begin, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all join from today. I am joining from the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation and pay respect to their elders past and present, as well as elders and representatives of other communities, and any Indigenous STEM students or professionals we have joining us today. As we share and discuss our own knowledge and practices, we also recognise the deep knowledge forever embedded in custodianship of country. I would also like to introduce who we have joining us online today. Within the ATSE Secretariat, we have Laura Navarro, STEM Careers Strategy Manager, and Owen Miles, Policy Analyst. And we are also excitedly joined by two ATSE Fellows, Professor Kay Basford and Dr. Nick Austin. Nick is a hydrologist by training, bridging engineering and agriculture in the critical area of water. And Nick joins us today as the chair of ATSE's Agriculture and Food Forum. Nick will be sharing some information about ATSE's forums and policy work with us later on today. And Kay is an emeritus professor at the University of Queensland. She has developed statistical methods that are used worldwide to improve crop breeding programs' efficiency and effectiveness. And Kay joins us today as one of the ATSE fellow mentors who provides mentoring to the members of the network, and she will speak to that a little later on. Later in the session, we have some time dedicated to a Q&A, where you can ask any questions that you might have, but if you want to pop them in the chat as we go, feel free to do so and we'll get to them later. So now I will hand over to Laura Navarro to provide some context on ATSE and the Emerging Leaders Network.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Before I begin, I also would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal country, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islanders joining us here online today. So before we dive into the details about the Emerging Leaders Networks and how it works, I would like to take a moment to provide a bit of context about ATSE, so the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. The acronym is ATSE, and our priorities as it links directly to the purpose of the network. ATSE is a learner academy of independent experts helping Australians understand and use technology to solve complex problems. ATSE brings together more than 900 fellows like Kay and Nick here today, who are Australia's leading experts in applied science, technology, and engineering. They come together to contribute to robust and practical thinking to Australia's big debates through advocacy to government. ATSE has 4 strategic goals that guide our activities and help drive our impact in the sector. You might see here on this slide, number 3, fostering diversity in the next generation, is the one that closely links to some of our programs and activities, and that includes the Emerging Leaders Network. To provide a bit of context, we have at ATSE 4 key STEM careers programs that cover all the way from school to leadership. We have Stella, our schools program that delivers hands-on teaching modules relating to STEM subjects for teachers and students, and provides an insight for students into careers in STEM. We have the Elevate, Boosting Women in STEM Scholarships, that is a program supported by the Australian government and will award up to 500 undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships to women and non-binary people in STEM, as an opportunity to increase representation of women and non-binary people in the sector. We have also the Industry Mentoring Network in STEM initiative, also known as IMMERSed, and that is an initiative that is focused on industry engagement for STEM researchers and helping them engage more actively outside of academia. And last but not least, the one we're here for today is the Emerging Leaders Network. It's a program that is designed to help young leaders in STEM to engage actively in science policy and decision making and bring their perspectives into how we create policy. And we'll take you a step back as well now on, we also have some policy priorities, and they link directly to the strategic goals I mentioned earlier. Once again, in number 3, we have one policy priority that is around exciting and educating young people in STEM. These priorities collectively are determined collectively by our fellowship, and they provide guidance on our activities and the goals of some of our activities as well. So exciting and educating young people in STEM, it's about preparing Australia's workforce for the future and ensuring they have the necessary digital skills, adaptability, and resilience. The Emerging Leaders Network directly links to this policy priority, and it has been established with the aim to support youth in STEM to bring their unique perspectives to the many global and national challenges that we face as a society. And it's an opportunity to bring new perspectives to ATSE policy work and advocacy work. The network provides young people with the opportunity to develop leadership capacity, work and learn alongside established scholars and industry leaders within the ATSE Fellowship, and contribute to a robust and practical thinking of Australia's big debates. It's a very hands-on opportunity to engage in science policy and decision-making through many of the mechanisms that ATSE uses to influence an evidence-based policy. And with that, I'll hand over back to Sarah to tell you a little bit more about how the network operates, the structure and time commitments.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, I'm going to talk to you just quickly about some of the nitty-gritty details of the network. So the network is comprised of up to 20 members, as you can see in this wheel here, with up to 2 emerging leaders joining each of ATSE's 9 policy forums, or the International Steering Group, which is known as the ISG. Our 9 forums, along with the ISG, are shown in this wheel, and members apply and are allocated to the forum that aligns with their professional experience. The International Steering Group's role is to ensure that ATSE's international activities and engagements are aligned with the Academy's broader strategic goals. The network operates under the guidance of the coordination team, shown in the middle there, which is made up of 2 emerging leader co-chairs. They are current members of the Emerging Leaders Network, and currently they are Aranola Akaboson, who is an emerging leader in the International Steering Group, and Samantha Papavasalou, who is an emerging leader in the Digital Futures Forum. Along with support from the ATSE Secretariat team, the co-chair's role is to facilitate effective communication and engagement among the members. On the right, the strategic direction and high-level support will come from the ATSE CEO, the Director of Policy and Government Relations, the Director of STEM Careers, the Policy Steering Group, and the Diversity Inclusion Committee. And lastly, your time commitment. We ask you to commit 5 hours a month for 1 year. In this time, you'll be expected to provide input to the annual work plan of the network, attend all events, meetings, and training workshops, and most importantly, actively participate in the projects of the assigned forum that you are in and contribute to meetings and policy outputs such as submissions, reports, or policy statements. I'll also note that members of the network join for 1 year with the possibility of extending for an additional year, depending on engagement levels and interest to continue contributing to the activities of the network. Next, I'm just going to go over the application and give some tips for writing a strong application. Answering the long form answer questions is really essential to a good application, as it's where you can personalize and tell us your unique story. It's an opportunity for you to articulate your motivations and aspirations related to the network. So I'll just talk through the 3 long form questions in the application form now. First one is, why are you interested in being a member of the network and why are you a suitable candidate? This first question is where you can explain your motivation for joining the network. A motivation and desire to learn from this experience is super, super important. So tell us what excites you. Maybe it's the chance to develop your leadership skills. Maybe it's the chance to collaborate with ATSE fellows. Be honest and be specific. It's also an opportunity to demonstrate why you're a good fit for the network. What skills, experiences, or qualifications do you have that align? This could be lived experience, policy advocacy experience, leadership potential, anything that you feel is relevant. Provide concrete examples of these. Secondly, how would your participation in the network enable you to influence and lead within and beyond the STEM sector? This is an opportunity to discuss your vision and aspirations. Explain how being a member of the network will enable you to drive change or create impact. This could be at a personal level, a sector-wide level, or even a wider social level. Again, share your vision or long-term goal and be as specific as you can. And finally, how would you benefit from participating in this network? In answering this last question, tell us what you hope to gain personally and/or professionally from being a member of the network. You could discuss skills, knowledge, or experiences that you hope to gain and why you hope to gain them. How do these align with your aspirations? What I've gone over now are just some tips to help you. There are also some additional prompts below each long form question in the application. Feel free to speak to the points that I haven't touched on just now or share anything else that you think is relevant. This isn't a concrete guide, it's just to help you along the way. And a reminder that applications will remain open until close of business, so 5 p.m. on Monday, the 30th of September. And in November, we will let everyone know the outcome of their application. I'd also like to note that if a written application form like the one on the website doesn't work for you, please reach out to us and we can arrange an alternative mode of application. For example, a video submission or anything else that you feel would work better for you. We can work together to find a solution to that. I'd now like to hand over to Nick Austin, ATSE's Agriculture and Food Forum Chair, to talk about ATSE's policy frameworks and how the network contributes to the work of the forums. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks for the chance to participate in this information session. I'll talk about the forums, as I've been asked, and how the forums play an important role for ATSE engaging in public policy. So I'll just talk a little bit about public policy as well, but I'll talk more specifically around both the Agriculture and Food Forum, the Water Forum that I also contribute to, and if I've still got a minute or two, I'll talk just about the Climate Change Working Group as a relatively new development within ATSE that connects between the forums. So to recap, perhaps what Laura's already covered in relation to ATSE being a learned academy. So it exists to promote technological sciences and engineering, and it brings together impartial, expert, evidence-based advice that really helps show how science and technology and engineering can be used to solve the sort of complex challenges that Australia faces. The 900 fellows that are within ATSE represent a pretty diverse fields of applied sciences, engineering, technology, tend to be later stage in their career since the election is based on achievements and contributions, but ATSE's been quite intentional about looking at building greater diversity within the cohort of fellows. The work's guided by 3 policy priorities. So those emerge from the policy steering group, and they comprise the climate change, adaptation and mitigation, enhancing research collaboration, translation and commercialisation, and developing a STEM skilled workforce. And Laura's already touched on that in her brief overview. ATSE has a reasonably influential voice on education, skills, research, climate and energy policy as a result of that sort of orientation. Policy, when I use the term policy, at least in my mind, I'm conceptualising that as the sort of basic agreed principles by which government is guided. So public policy is essentially an authoritative statement by government about what its intentions are. So it is intentional public policy designed to achieve some stated or understood purposes. Generally, it's shaped by hypotheses about cause and effect, structured around objectives and public values, highly political in nature. So ATSE provides advice to government decision makers in that context to help equip them with the sort of information that they need to make the best possible public policy decisions. And it does this in two ways. Firstly, around maintaining relationship with government ministers and shadow ministers, and that's quite an intentional outcome-focused effort by ATSE. The other is through publications, whether it's publishing submissions to government inquiry or areas where government is inviting perspectives. It's publishing research reports with industry, and it's publishing explainers for the public. And I'll give a couple of examples of those as I talk briefly around the forums. So the forums play an important role within ATSE. Laura just touched on some of the arrangements, and so too did Sarah. ATSE's government consists of a board, an assembly, which is a strategic advisory body, a number of board committees, the professional secretariat, of which Sarah and Owen and Laura are members, and then state and territory-based divisions and policy-generating forums. I've been asked to talk about the forums, and ATSE uses these to bring fellows together in a way that contributes the research sort of informed and practical thinking to Australia's big debates. And there are 9 industry sector forums. The Agriculture and Food Forum, which I chair, Digital Futures, Education, Energy, Health and Technology, Industry and Innovation, Infrastructure, Mineral Resources, and Water. And I also contribute to the Water Forum. But I'm most strongly associated with the Ag and Food Forum, which brings together leading experts from across Australia in agriculture, again, to provide advice on tackling problems, in this case, that increasingly threaten global food security and agricultural production. So these include things like population growth, changing dietary preferences, climate change, competition for natural resources. And we need concerted action by industry and governments across agriculture and food value chains to increase the use of technology and engineering and science in offsetting and reducing some of these pressures. A recent example of an output, just to give you some specifics, if you like, is an explainer on Australia's soil carbon opportunities and risks. So obviously highly topical. More carbon stored in the soil than there is in the atmosphere and all plant life combined. And sequestering carbon in soils not only removes it from, or at least carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it can have some positive effects on soil health, on agricultural yields, and on ecosystem benefits. But there are important barriers for the technology becoming widespread as an emissions reduction strategy. And so that explainer delves into some of those barriers and provides advice on the way that technologies can be used to greater effect. If you're interested, the explainer, as in all of the ATSE publications, is available on the website. I'll give another example in relation to the Water Forum. A recent output of the Water Forum was a very recent, it was only last week that this one came out, which was an explainer on closing the water gap, access to secure and reliable and safe drinking water is essential to human health and well-being, recognised by the United Nations as a human right. But many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities just don't have adequate access to drinking water and sanitation and hygiene. There's contamination from minerals and chemicals and microbes that exceed safe thresholds within Australia's drinking water guidelines. And exposure for prolonged periods causes chronic health impacts in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. There's a real lack of baseline data on water quality in these communities, and many communities aren't able to access regular testing to know if the water that they have access to is meeting water quality guidelines. These issues have lasted for decades, and they've been compounded by short-term research funding cycles and political leadership roles. So ATSE has an important role to play, bringing objective evidence-informed information there. So the explainer outlines different approaches to protect against water inequalities in these remote communities. and goes to some of the sort of key opportunities to not just around technologies, although more fit for context water treatment technologies do play an important role, but it also explores greater communication and its opportunities between council and water treatment plant operators and local Aboriginal champions and the like, but also makes observations around mining and agricultural industries, which are contributors to water pollution and ways in which they might be held to account. I mentioned that was released just last week. I think it might have even been Friday, and one of the team might correct me if I'm wrong there, but it was very recently. But over the weekend, there were at least 63 different mentions of that explainer, including in newspapers around the country, on ABC Radio in Kimberley and Broken Hill and Wimmera. It featured on TV news in Western Australia and elsewhere. I think the team tallied up the reach of more than 170,000 people in these last few days from that, and hopefully some of you online saw reference to that in media. So that outreach is intended to help inform and educate, and in doing so indirectly influence public perceptions and public expectations of government. Very briefly, I'll touch on the Climate Change Working Group, which is relatively recent within ATSE. It's a working group of the Policy Steering Group. So its purpose is to advance ATSE's climate change policy and activities that relate to both mitigation and adaptation. And so it works with ATSE's forums and divisions that I briefly touched on before. As a working group, it's limited to 2 years, and it only held its first meeting relatively recently, last month. And if the work of the working group is seen as valid after its 2-year time limit, then potentially it might establish as a new or equivalent policy forum to the ag and food or water or the other 7 that I mentioned. The sort of topics that are being considered include independent verification of carbon sequestration, detection of geoengineering, so that's technologies like carbon removal, but also solar geoengineering, things like reflecting solar radiation back into space. And there's an unmet need for evidence-informed advice around the technologies and their opportunities in that highly topical space. Similarly, and thirdly, methane and other fugitive emissions. I should probably pause there, but before I do, and I know Professor Kay Basford is going to be talking about mentorship in a moment, I might just make mention that I've been really fortunate to mentor 2 emerging leaders from the inaugural intake, last year's intake. Emma Kon from Flinders University and Deepak Malaya from Deakin, also working with Southeast Water now. These are outstanding individuals, people who I've learned a lot more from and I've contributed to, without a doubt. We meet informally, virtually every month or 2. And where our travel permit, we catch up in person if that works. And our discussions are pretty wide-ranging, certainly much broader than the topics of the forum. In this case, both Deepak and Emma have been assigned to the Water Forum, and they've participated in the Water Forum in exactly the same way that the fellows who are members of that forum would. So they review documents, they weigh in on discussions. That could be quite daunting, of course. Both Emma and Deepak are relatively early career, both submitted their PhDs during this past year, and relatively early in career, assessing where they want their careers to go. And this has been an opportunity not just to gain an appreciation of how ATSE works, but how different ways of influencing public policy can happen. And whether or not that's convinced them that it is something they want to pursue, or the opposite, I'm not sure. But it's been a really valuable opportunity for me, and I've appreciated that chance. So with that, I think I should stop and hand Laura now across to Kay, I think.
Thanks, Nick. Some really great and specific examples of recent work that ATSE's forums and associated groups have been involved in, and the type of work that the emerging leaders might work on and contribute to. I'll now hand over to Kay, as mentioned, who is one of the network mentors to talk a little bit more about the role that mentorship plays during someone's time as a member of the Emerging Leaders Network. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you very much, Sarah. This is a hard thing to talk about because there aren't hard and fast rules about mentorship. It depends very much on what a person who is a mentee would like to get from the various discussions and experience that the person who is their mentor wants. I think mentors are very often informal. In this particular case, we've actually got formal mentors. You've actually been given a couple of mentees, and ATSE asks for mentors, and people put their hands up and say, yeah, I'll volunteer for that, and you get assigned people. I've got Ariana and Irinola, and it's particularly in relation to the International Steering Group. I had chaired that group for a few years, and then now I'm not on that group. So, and therefore I don't receive minutes of the meetings, etc. So it's a very interesting process to mentor people in that area. And I probably do so based much more on my general experience in ATSE. I was very fortunate to be on the board of ATSE, and at one stage was the vice president. Fantastic. It's a fantastic group of people to work with and be involved with. And I took a lot of advice from someone I would call a mentor to me when he was an original vice president, Max Liu, who's now a vice chancellor in the UK. But he was at the University of Queensland and had always been willing to talk to me and answer questions and just give some general advice. It is important that when you have a mentor-mentee relationship, that you are comfortable with the style of the people that you're working with. I know in one or two instances, I felt my role as a mentor was also to put forward people I was mentoring, possibly to opportunities that may arise. And I know at one stage someone was very uncomfortable with that aspect and certainly did not want to be put forward for potential opportunities. So, you've got to be able to say, no, I don't want that to happen, and so it didn't happen. But it's very much relies on being open from both sides, talking about, well, perhaps what your experience is if you're a potential mentor, what you've done in your career. The international agricultural development area is where I've known Nick from, because it used to be called the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, CGIAR, and it was a group of the international research centres around the world that were focused on various things. It could have been rice, it could have been wheat, it could have been maize, it could be animals, all different areas. There were about 15 of them. And that was a fantastic experience. I was on the board of IRI, the International Rice Research Institute, and got quite a lot of international experience that way. My training initially was as a statistician, but I've always worked in agriculture, and the University of Queensland had a very internationally development focus in their agriculture department. So I found that was very interesting. I must admit I had no concept that it was an area that I was going to get into, but talking to people, finding out about what they were doing, developed my interest. And I think that interest was very much honed by people working in those areas and people who are in ATSE and in the Institute of Agricultural Science who are working in these areas. So I think the mentor-mentee relationship is very much a, let's have a discussion regularly and talk about anything that you're interested in, any issues you have. I mean, some women feel quite isolated in some of their professional STEM careers and want to know how you may have approached that or whether that was an issue that you felt. Other times it's not an issue at all. So I think it's very hard to give hard and fast statements about mentorship. I think it's purely a relationship between a couple of people, usually someone who's older and more experienced in areas and someone who's younger and less experienced in their career. And it's discussions about whatever they want to talk about. And then sometimes they'll think, well, that's a bit of advice that someone else might take, but that's not for me. And that is perfectly fine. A mentor does not expect that a mentee follows exactly what anyone says. It's an opportunity to discuss, put some things forward, and then the mentee would actually discuss it and whether they feel comfortable with perhaps following some of those ideas. But it's not by any means a rigid relationship. I think that's probably what I want to say, and I'd be very happy answering questions that you might have about mentor relationships and whether you find them very useful. I have been personally found informal mentors who never actually said to me, I'm going to mentor you, but just talked about their careers, talked about some decisions they had to make, talked about opportunities they had. And that's how I benefited enormously from those sorts of discussions. And in fact, they were very informal, unstated mentor-mentee relationships. I'd probably like to leave it at that, Sarah, if you're comfortable with that, or Laura.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kay. A great reminder that there's no one way that a mentoring relationship is going to look, and it's really important to understand what you want to learn and what you need support with, while mentoring that within the context of the Emerging Leaders Network, mentors specifically can help you to understand how ATSE works and how to navigate participating in an ATSE forum. So thank you, Kay. We'll now move into the Q&A section of the session. This is a chance to ask absolutely any questions you might have about the network. We've already got a few in the chat, but feel free to keep popping them in there or use the hand raised function if you would like to use your microphone. Firstly, from Alicia, how are the focus topics in each forum chosen? The forum most relevant to me is health technologies, but this seems quite broad, so I'm not sure how much domain knowledge is needed. Nick, would you feel, or Owen, comfortable speaking to that?
Happy to have a go, and Owen and Kay, please weigh in as well. And I'll give some examples from ag and food. So the forums have formal quarterly meetings, but engage informally. And my understanding is each forum operates broadly in a similar fashion, but with some important differences that work for the way in which the leadership of the forums function. Now, ag and food is one of the largest, I believe, in ATSE. It has a membership of around 140 odd, 130 odd. And by membership, this is when fellows are elected or at different stages indicate they want to associate with that particular forum. So it's up to individual fellows as to how much or how little they want to engage with the forums. My assessment is there's a relatively small number of people who are deeply engaged with the work of the forum, some who are aware of but not as fully engaged, and others who perhaps don't engage, and that reflects the realities of people's lives, stages of career, different things that compete for attention. But there is an incredible depth and breadth of knowledge that exists, and where particular issues come up, there will be experts within that space. So each forum, through the leadership, which is a subset of those fellows who are engaged, generally a chair, 2 deputy chairs, and with some forums, a larger sounding board or group of advisors or leaders within the forum, meet quarterly and discuss issues, including the sort of focus topics, to use Alicia's term there. I mentioned before that ATSE is supported through a secretariat, and that's a finite bunch of busy people who are pulled in different directions on competing topics. And so there's necessarily a process that the policy steering group, the overseeing group, goes through to determine which are actually the important matters. Because I personally may think something is a focus issue and we should be working on it, but it may not rise to the top when it's weighed up against the different sort of priorities. And so from an individual forum, these priorities emerge through a relatively organic discussion process and find their way through the assessment by the policy steering group to have a work program that then gets resourced and supported by the secretariat within ATSE, who do a tremendous job in enabling that work. So it's a little bit bottom up. It's also occasionally sort of top down, where there's a particular government inquiry or set of opportunities where ATSE sees disproportionate leverage, and so those can emerge and then necessarily be weighed up against the existing sort of portfolio of work. I hope that's not too confused. I hope it does reflect the sort of a sense of that opportunity versus more strategic engagement, which then are negotiated through the fellows and through the secretariat within ATSE. But Owen and Kay, no doubt, will have much to add.
No, I think that was a really good summary, Nick. I will just point to the distinction between the opportunity and the planned work. So we do have things like government submissions and responses to inquiries and things like that. That work is coming to us, and we are basically choosing to either do it or not do it, which is just a leadership decision. Usually that's a very short submission or some kind of prepared work that is relatively brief. And then we have our longer term projects, which Nick talked about, that being sort of the policy steering group and the forum leadership kind of doing a top-down, bottom-up arrangement. That work there is made on a 3-year plan. Next year will be the end of our 3-year plan. So next year will actually be quite a good year, because we'll probably be starting to look at what we're going to be doing for the next 3 years, which means that this will be the great time to be talking about new topics, new things that we can cover, rather than just continuing the work that we've already been doing. But that's all I wanted to add to Nick's very useful comments.
I'm just going to add, from an applicant perspective, don't discard yourself because you're not an expert on everything, or this is a learning opportunity. This is an opportunity to broaden your understanding of a lot of the topics that are crucial to Australia's development. So don't discourage yourself from applying because you're not an expert on various topics. This is a learning opportunity. That's why you have a mentor who can help you guide, the journey and how you engage with the forums. So yeah, give it a go.
Thanks, everyone. A question from Jem. Are the forums held online or in person? is there an expectation that members would travel?
My experience is it's always been online.
Likewise, I've had the opportunity, as I've travelled though, to meet up with the mentors, the mentees that I've been paired with. That's not, it's opportunistic rather than expected, and it's a great chance given that they're located in different states, but that we all have reasons to travel. But all of the forums and all of the engagements have been online.
From Sangeeta, are there leadership trainings as well for members? Also on domain knowledge, is energy sector a priority in the context of climate change?
I can talk around the training. There's some training provided in sessions that relate to the policy work, so people can increase their comfort level engaging in policy and how to contribute effectively. Emerging leaders are also invited to some other professional development opportunities. It's not so much around leadership in the traditional sense of leadership. I think it's more on the hands-on experience of engaging with leaders, putting your voice out there, that you actually get to experience a bit of growth in your own expertise and your own role in the sector as a change maker. So it's not a traditional leadership training, but we provide tools and support to make sure that you engage effectively and that this supports your leadership journey. And for the domain knowledge, that might be more for Nick or Owen. Okay.
I'm happy to have just link it back to the mention I made of the climate change working group. And I understand it is a relatively new approach within ATSE to have the working group that bridges across the different forums and works the breadth of ATSE's domain. And so there is, as I touched on, a forum, an energy forum within ATSE, and clearly becoming a net zero nation is a high priority for government policy at the moment. That intersects with different sectors, including agriculture, but energy is absolutely a priority, both in the context of climate change, but more broadly with some of Australia's international commitments.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Laura.
Just to add very briefly to that, just from a context of the government requests for information on climate change, they're very focused on energy at the moment. It's obviously a massive topic, there's lots in it. So a lot of the work, and before we got this working group set up, was coming through the Energy Forum on climate change. That being said, there is a range of other sectors involved, which is why we wanted this working group. Agriculture, transport, infrastructure, a whole range of other areas that do link in with that climate change.
There's a lot of overlap. They're not hard and fast boundaries at all. They're just interest areas, really.
Thank you. We have a question around the age limit. If I turn 41 in December, is it still okay for me to apply? And if successful, would I have the second year opportunity or not? When applying, members must be in the age range of 25 to 40. And if you reach over that age limit during your membership, you'll be able to keep that current term, but won't be eligible to reapply. However, applications are considered on a case-by-case basis, and if you feel you've experienced something such as career disruptions that would kind of place you within that age bracket, please feel free to add that in your application or reach out to us at the email that I'll share at the end of this meeting, and we can discuss your personal situation more specifically. One from Talia. I know ATSE is dedicated to assessing the effectiveness of its programs. Were there any key learnings from the previous cohort that have impacted the network for this year?
I think one of the learnings from the pilot year is around the mentoring. In the pilot year, we paired the leaders with fellows who were not related to their forum. I think we've now learned that having your mentor being part of the same forum you're going to be joining in can be beneficial to the experience for some people, because that means that the mentor can provide some feedback on how they can engage more effectively and make them feel supported. Because believe it or not, it can be quite daunting being in a room, even if it's a virtual room full of experts. And that's something that we want to make sure that the emerging leaders feel supported in that journey. And that's something that we're considering for the new year and how mentoring will happen. Another something that has affected how we, not affected, but improved how we're doing things is the consideration that the pilot year, we were thinking only for 1 year for the participants. And some people decided that, 1 year was enough, but some people really want to keep growing and learning. That's why we have offered the opportunity to extend for a second year. And that's why we have some positions available for the current cohorts. Anything in terms of the engagement and the policy forums, Owen?
I think the main thing is, from my perspective, was realizing the information that we needed to get across to the members of the network so that they could engage most effectively in the policy work. We initially had quite a few people who were unsure when we asked for input what we were expecting from them. And so I think one of the things that we learnt was how to communicate what we need from the emerging leaders a bit better, and how we can work together a bit more effectively. And so I think in the next cohort, we're probably going to be doing a bit of that communication much, much earlier in the process, so that we can start working together much more effectively, much sooner.
Maybe if I could just add a personal reflection, Sarah, from one of my learnings, and that was the value of the informal conversations, so that the people I've been paired with as mentees participate in the water forum, and then we have an informal catch-up in between those engagements to sort of debrief and reflect and make sense of some of the observations or the way in which ATSE works. And so that, to me, has been a really valuable part of it, getting the fresh set of eyes on the way in which the forums are working and things that make sense or don't, and then some interpretation and bouncing ideas around, rather than, and I think there's been an understandable reluctance to offer views within the setting of those forums, and that's not necessarily the expectation of people participating, but it's that opportunity is there. But it's really the sense-making interpretation that I found particularly valuable, the discussions in between the forum engagements with the two emerging leaders that I'm working with.
Thanks, everyone. Fiona, I can see your hand up there.
Yes, hi everyone. I just have a question about the split between academia and industry in the forums. I'm interested in the energy forum, and I was just interested to know the split in general between the forums.
I'm happy to jump in on that. We are still a bit heavy on the academia side of things. I think about 60% of the fellows are from academia or have an academia background, but that leaves about 40% of the fellows who either come from industry or government, government being a relatively small part of that fraction. Without looking up the numbers, I can't tell you exactly what it is in the energy forum specifically, but roughly it's about a 60-40 split.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And is that kind of the split that you're after, or are you, there's no real, I guess, right split, it's just, I guess, how it falls? But
for the participants, the members of the network?
Yes, yeah. Are there any kind of targets that you have in terms of how the forums are, composed?
We don't think about too much. We do want some representation from different parts of the sector, but it's more about finding the right people who are willing to contribute, who will gain a lot from the experience, who are willing to participate. That balance can be considered by the selection committee when if you have some excellent candidates that they need to balance in terms of representation, but it's more about finding the right people that are willing to contribute and make the most of the experience. Obviously, there's as an academy, we always aim for 40-40-20 balance in terms of gender representation. But experience, backgrounds, all is all considered by the selection committee in terms of representation in the members of the network.
Okay, that's great.
But industry perspectives, because the Emerging Leaders Network is not a program, it's not focused on PhD students. It's 25 to 40-year-olds. They need to be related to STEM, but you could be doing a bachelor's degree, you could be doing your master's, you could be in industry, you can be doing a PhD, doing a postdoc, or something else. It's all about bringing your perspectives and experience and wanting to learn.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Any other questions? We have time for one more. From Lamia, hello, I'd like to better understand the education sector. Is there a focus on a particular age range, i.e. primary versus secondary versus uni versus postgraduate?
As the policy person, I'll jump in here. The Education Forum covers all of those areas. I'll also add it includes vocational education as well, not just schools, unis. It does tend to skew a bit more towards the post-high school education, just simply because of the fellowship experience in that area. We don't have many high school teachers, former high school teachers as fellows, or primary school teachers as fellows, but that is an area we see as a really important stepping stone to building STEM careers. So if we are engaging them only at a university or only at a vocational education or post-graduation level, we're engaging a lot of people way too late. So that's why we have things like Stella, which is in schools. It's a kits that high schools and primary schools can use to teach about educational topics. But from a policy perspective, secondary education gets a pretty decent hearing. Primary education is something that we would like to do more on because we know how important it is, but traditionally isn't somewhere that we have done a huge amount in, but we are still interested in it.
Thanks, Owen. Might wrap up the Q&A section there, although if there is anything else that comes to mind later, you can email us. An address will appear on the screen shortly. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today as we approach the second year of the existence of the Emerging Leaders Network. It's really great to see engagement and to have you all online with us today. If you'd like to apply or find out more, you can follow this QR code here, which will take you to the website. There's also the network guidelines, which contain all of the information you should need to know. But if anything's unclear or you have any specific questions, please reach out to us at the email down there, stemcareers@atse.org.au. And yeah, thank you.